When the media writes about you, it is like third-party corroboration. It's almost like an implied endorsement. And it does create such a signal of trust with people that they are willing to spend a little bit more to work with someone who is really renowned and known for being a reputable business. It sends a strong signal of you being a recognized expert and authority in that world. And it does send a huge signal to customers.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Welcome to the Small Business Mentor podcast, where we shine a light on the black holes of business growth with your host, Alan Pence. In each episode, we explore the leaps and bounds entrepreneurs make as they push their businesses beyond the 1 million mark into the realm of professional sustainable growth. Stay with us as we navigate the journey from brute force to finesse.
Great. On the pod today, we have Mickie Kennedy. He is founder and CEO of a company called eReleases. Welcome to the pod, Mickie.
Thanks for having me.
So tell us a little bit about eReleases and what you guys do.
I started a little over 25 years ago. Originally, I was working in DC for a telecom research startup, and I was writing releases and not having much luck. But then I realized that we were publishing data, and I was just publishing little data charts and sending to the media. And what the media was really wanting was a story. So I looked behind the data, found anomalies and shared stories. Like I remember we had just published international traffic between the United States and like Caribbean countries. And one country stood out as having, more traffic than most all the other countries combined. And when I looked into it, it was because it was the call center for most 1-900 numbers. And they were really popular, I guess, in the early 90s. And so I then sent a release out about that. And after getting no success with several releases, we got picked up by The Economist, Financial Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, and 3 telecom trade publications. And so I kind of felt like, whoa, maybe I've hit onto something. So I continued to do releases, picking out anomalies and data and talking about them. And we continued to get pickup. And I just saw how transformative it was for the startup. We're getting lots of sales, mostly from telecom companies and telecom attorneys and telecom analysts. But we started talking about trends that we were seeing over years. So in developing countries, we'd see double-digit international telecom traffic growth that usually preceded economic growth that was in the double digits. And so published that, and all of a sudden we started getting orders from investment firms and VCs and other types of people. So it was really exciting, and I felt like, I think I could do this for other people. And around the same time that I was faxing these, because that's what we did back then, we faxed, a lot of the journalists would call and say, hey, could you start emailing these? Because email's so much better than faxing. And I was like, oh yeah, I agree. And so I spent a year in my spare time, which wasn't considerable when you work for a startup, just hanging out on bulletin boards, which were real popular, and networking with journalists and getting their email addresses and asking them if I could send them releases. And so I launched in October of 1998 with about 10,000 journalists. Initially, I was going to be technology oriented because I was already in the telecom field. But as I would network with journalists, I would find they'd be all over the place as for what they covered. And so I just pretty much covered all different types of journalists. And over the years, PR Newswire reached out to us. They liked what we were doing and offered a local or state distribution to us at a discount. And I really pushed back and said, these clients are looking for national media attention. And they were very hesitant because, they charged $1,600 for a 600-word press release. And at the time, I was charging my clients like $300. So, despite that, they continued to talk. And one of the things that we discovered while talking is that they have an overnight editorial team that doesn't do very much. They have to be there in case there's breaking news or someone wants to get something out to the Asian market and they need to coordinate with the Asian news bureaus. But other than that, they're sitting idle for hours. And I was like, I could start scheduling my releases for next business day by default. And you could set them up overnight and it wouldn't cost you any additional labor because you have these idle hours. And so at that point, they said, okay, we're going to test it and give you a national distribution. And since then, it's continued to work really well. where our customers, for probably 30 to 40% of what it would cost to go over PR Newswire, get a national distribution over PR Newswire. And they also get additional bells and whistles that we've negotiated over the years, like certain, they call them influencer lists now, which are little discrete email sends to certain types of journalists and things like that normally cost anywhere from $500 to $800 additional and get no extra charge with us.
Oh, that's interesting. How would you contrast your service to like PR Newswire? I mean, are you the same thing?
Well, yes, we are the same thing as PR Newswire as far as like the distribution. We just work, I guess, sort of as a co-op on behalf of small businesses. The thing that PR Newswire liked about us is they would never target small businesses for their service. Just not enough meat in it for them. Their salesperson's looking for someone with an average ticket of $20,000 to $40,000 a year, and so spending $1,600 on a release is no big deal, and adding a $20-some thousand multimedia newsroom is no big deal. But for my clients, their spend might be under $1,500 a year. So they didn't want to go after that market, but they liked how we serve it already. And in aggregate, we move like over 10,000 press releases a year. So we are pretty sizable from that standpoint. And as a result, they thought we were a really good fit. We do have rules, like if a large company or a publicly traded company comes through to us, we send them to a contact directly at the wire. So I feel like we try to be a really good partner and steer people that are appropriate for their salespeople and for working directly with them.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So a small business version of the PR Newswire, basically. So talk about a little bit about how the rise of social media and the internet side of it has affected the business.
I have to say, a little over 15 years ago, the Newswire was not very accepting of new media sources. And I went to bat for one blogger in particular who wanted journalist access to the wire. And a lot of people say, well, you can see all the releases on PR Newswire publicly. Why would you need the journalist access? And the cool thing about the journalist access is once you go in, you can customize your feed. So you're just looking at, say, the industry that you cover. And even more specifically, you can set up exclusions. So maybe you cover the fashion world, but you don't cover like retail fashion, like, so if it mentions JCPenney or Target, you can exclude those types of releases. So it's a very customized feed. And it makes the job of a busy journalist very easy to see exactly what they're interested in. At the same time, my original business of emailing press releases has fallen apart. If you talk to any journalist, they'll tell you their email inbox is just like an explosion. It's chaos. And what happened over the past 25 years is the introduction of media databases that people license and pay for. And so it's as cheap as like $5,000 a year. And I see them go up to like $20,000, $25,000 a year, especially if you want international global media. And so when a golf club company pays, say, $10,000 for one of these databases, and then they realize there's only 2,800 journalists that say that they're interested in golf products, they look at the database and say, well, there's like 500,000 people there. And they start talking themselves into, well, bankers buy golf clubs, so let's send it to banking journalists. And all of a sudden, financial analysts who would never report on a product like golf clubs are getting off-targeted press releases. And there's so many people who just say, it doesn't cost anything extra. Let's just send to more people in the hopes of getting media coverage. And it just makes everything pure chaos. So that's been an interesting development. But after PR Newswire finally started to accept bloggers as journalists and giving them access, I was very pleasantly surprised to discover that they have done a lot of outreach with social media and have brought in influencers as journalists. And I discovered it because I follow this TikTok guy called Snackalator, and he does a weekly roundup of new snacks hitting grocery store shelves. And he said, hey, I can't tell from this image whether that's a glaze or icing, but I'm looking forward to it. But these are the images I get from The Wire, because that's where I get all of my news of new products and stuff like that. And I was like, oh, wow, so that's really cool. And I reached out to him and he's like, yeah, he goes, if I waited until these products hit my shelf at my grocery store, I would always be talking about stuff people already knew about. And so he's actively looking at the Newswire and seeing when these new products are coming out and using their images and photos and things like that as well.
But I guess the other thing I would think would happen is like a lot of journalists, like famously just combed Twitter, right? And found their stories that way. And I guess it's maybe an all of the above kind of answer, but did that kind of eat into this like email and onslaught?
I mean, it is possible. There also has been a fragmented exodus of Twitter. So people are all over the place now. It's made it a little more difficult to reach them. But the Newswire still tends to be a really great place for journalists to look for news. In the US, it's basically a duopoly of two newswires of press releases, and that's PR Newswire and Business Wire. There's no need to go to both because, journalists fish in both ponds. And, there has been a third company that tried to enter. And at one point they were doing well. But what happened is, the publishing world and newspaper world hasn't done extremely well. So journalists are expected to do more with less. And so they just didn't tolerate going to a third newswire. And so they were never going there looking for stories. So that company tilted. And now they're working, mostly positioning themselves as to smaller publicly traded companies and saying, hey, with us, you can meet disclosure for a smaller price. And, the fact that we don't reach a lot of journalists is actually an advantage for some people who would prefer journalists not look too closely at their financials and other aspects of their company. So that's pretty much it. A lot of people do know of other types of wires like the Associated Press and Reuters and UPI, United Press International, and other places like that. And they work differently. They don't transmit press releases. They write their own articles. So they may receive a press release, but they write their own articles and then license them to people like newspapers. So busy newspaper doesn't have to drop everything and write about Supreme Court finding or something like that. They can just pull that story from the Associated Press and pay a licensing fee directly to them.
Okay, so I'm assuming most small businesses probably don't do much in the way of, they might do a press release that they put on their site or tweet out or put on LinkedIn or Instagram or something. So how do businesses use services like yours? Is it like product launching, I guess, that kind of thing?
They can. I mean, pretty much people use us for everything under the sun. I'd say the two most common press releases that we get are personnel changes, and they're usually not a new executive or an industry veteran. For that reason, they don't do very well because, let's be honest, the media doesn't care that you have a new associate person in HR. But I think that the reason that my clients do that is they know that it looks good. The new hire gets to see themselves on Yahoo Finance and a few places that syndicate the press release. And that's what it's called when the press release gets replicated on a few websites. That's never the goal because those locations don't get a lot of traffic. And in many cases, if you go to those news sites and do a search, you won't even show up there because you're usually on a subsection of the site, like a subdomain or something like that. But, the other one is a product launch press release, and they usually fall flat. The average press release we get is, here's our product and here's a list of features and here's a page to learn more or to buy it. And going back to what I learned many years ago is that journalists like stories and they like to tell a story arc, even if it's a small article. And when it's just a list of features, there's not a lot for them to work with. So I do try to coach my clients that, going forward with a product launch, incorporate a use case study. Talk about someone who had a problem, what their experience was using your product or service, what the outcome was. Ideally with some data or numbers is always nice. And then have an amazing quote by them talking about how favorable it was using the product or service or what the outcome was for them. And all of a sudden, that allows the journalist to wrap a really good story around that and incorporate that use case study. So many people write from the perspective of, we have this important thing we either want to sell or promote. And they don't look at it from the standpoint of a journalist who's trying to determine, is this going to educate, entertain, or delight, or ideally all of that for their audience? And so I always tell people, it's almost like rewrite your press release and then kind of reverse engineer it, solving the problem of what would make this irresistible to a journalist audience. And by then going in and doing that, you'll have a much better chance of a journalist writing about it. And one is to satisfy that story arc need. And the second thing is to maybe put something down there that shows the stakes. If you have a logistics software solution that really creates efficiency and savings for a transportation business, for example, maybe talk about what the failure rate is. It's a publicly available number probably in your industry. And you can point out that according to XYZ survey, 67% of new transportation companies fail in the first 5 years because they can't control cost and reach profitability. And then you can talk about your product in regards to achieving those types of profits. And so that shows the stakes, the importance of your product, and that really raises the likelihood that their audience would be interested in it. And so I think that, again, just rethinking things from the perspective of a journalist and looking towards the story arc and what are the things that you could add to a release that would really help to build in a story arc. I always tell people, look at Shark Tank. Everybody that appears on there opens with a story. And it's usually, how they came about starting the product or the business. And it's usually sometimes it can be a vulnerability, like they lost a spouse or a family member, or they had a very tragic divorce, or lost a career business and they were sidetracked. And all of a sudden they felt like, hey, I had this hobby, or I used to enjoy this, or I thought of this. And the reason that they often open with that is because it really humanizes them and gets people to care. And that's really important. And the people behind Shark Tank recognize that, because people don't want to interact with, just product names and, nameless businesses. They want to feel a connection. And putting your story and owning your story in your press release, even if it's not the focus of the press release, but incorporating it in there is really valuable. In the early .com era, when I was just getting started, every article about eBay mentioned the fact that the founder created it to help sell his girlfriend's Pez collection. And it's a very relatable kind of story, like, hey, I'm a geek programmer, so of course I'm going to create a whole platform for my girlfriend who's trying to sell her Pez collection. And it was interesting, and everybody ran with it. It later came out that it wasn't true. It was sort of created by a PR firm, but it really showed the value of these stories. And I'm not ever telling anybody to make up a story like that, but, look back to your business, look back at your inspiration, and maybe there are some creative liberties that you could take that would really make a very interesting story that you could incorporate into your business lore and share with people.
Well, that's interesting. So, obviously journalists want to write about hot topics, right? So maybe now it's AI, or maybe now it's that AI isn't working or something like that. So there are kind of these broad themes that I assume it's good to hack into, right? Newsjacking and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I will tell people that newsjacking doesn't work the way it initially did. The idea was to find a hot topic that's trending and then join the conversation. And I find that there's just so many people doing that now. When the Target had the credit card breach many years ago, I had a client that wanted to do exactly that. They were in, the security business. And we went and counted on just PR Newswire the number of releases that mentioned the credit card breach over the past 30 days. And it was over 1,400. So I pointed out to them that the likelihood of your press release generating even one article is going to be really, really remote. And that being said, I suggested, is there a contrarian viewpoint you could take? And, you never want to take a viewpoint that's going to alienate your existing customer base. So, you won't be able to do this with all positions. But is there something that everybody's saying this that you could say the exact opposite and say that's not a good approach? And the reason those work really well is journalists like to be fair and balanced, and they like to show both sides. And if everybody is in agreement on, hey, this is the path going forward and the things that you should look out for, if you're the one person saying, hey, this is a distraction, the average business is not big enough to attract people to come after you. You can spend a lot of money with consultants and other things to batten down the hatches. But to be honest, if you're meeting, the basic requirements of your liability insurance and you're following best practices, you really shouldn't focus and worry about this. The exception being like if you're Amazon or Walmart or these other things. But if you're a small business, don't get taken by consultants looking to reach into your pocket. And the likelihood then is that every article about this, they can put you in there as the contrarian viewpoint. And I find that sometimes just looking at things that are like newsjacking, is there a different approach that could increase the likelihood of getting pickup. So with newsjacking, if it's competitive, you might get one or two articles. But if you have a contrarian viewpoint on something that's trending, you have the likelihood of getting dozens of pickups because you get put into lots of releases as the only person who raised their hand and said, here's the other side, the con, the negative side of this approach.
So until everybody figures that out too, right? Then you have to be contrarian to the contrarians, right? So beyond these sort of tactics, like, and hot topics, and you mentioned obviously telling a story, but are there like categories of things that companies do or have that journalists tend to be interested in beyond like whatever the hot thing is?
Yes. So a lot of criticism for the last 25 years I've heard is that press releases don't work and they're just not effective. And I will agree that 97% of press releases that are out there and ones that go over the wire, like PR Newswire, probably don't generate earned media. But that doesn't mean that press releases don't work. It means that you should focus on the 3% of press releases that work again and again. And there are things like data-heavy press releases work really well. You doing your own industry survey and study and authoring that data is very effective. I've coached many clients through that. It sounds daunting, but just to break it down, it's 12 to 16 questions in SurveyMonkey, 4 questions per page. So if someone stops halfway, you've got half their responses. The outcome is a link that you then go to a smaller independent trade association in your industry. Every industry has many of these that you've never heard of. Find one that has an audience that sort of aligns with who you are, your marketplace, and stay away from the big ones. The big ones get all the media attention that they want, and they're not going to cooperate with you. But if you approach one of these that has I like 600 members or more, average is probably a little over 1,000 for a lot of these people. You approach them and say, hey, I have this survey that I'm doing. I'm looking to get at least 100 responses. If you could send this out and get 100 responses for me, I'd love to mention you in the press release I'll be issuing over PR Newswire. And this works 2/3 of the time with just that pitch. And the reason is nobody knows about these people. They don't get media attention. And here you are approaching them saying, I can perhaps get you mentioned in the media. And so the ask is very small from them. It's just getting that link out to their members. And then once you've got the results, you're going to look at it and try to figure out what is the 1 or 2 question here that would really shock or hugely interest your industry that you could really form something around on and make the press release the focus of that. You're going to have an amazing quote. And by amazing, I mean, it could be your creative flourish, but for most people, it's just really paraphrasing something and saying something really strong and intense. And you're going to say something about why the numbers skewed a particular way because you're the expert. You're the author of the survey, and you're providing the analysis of why the survey probably yielded that way. You mentioned AI. That's a really good one. You could ask people, do you believe that AI is going to replace your job in the next 5 years? And if, say, 53% said yes, you could say, while I don't believe that half of these people are going to be eliminated over the next 5 years because of AI, I do believe that those who don't explore AI and figure out how to utilize it as part of their business may be at a severe disadvantage career-wise going forward. And then you take that release, you're going to send it out, but include a link to a page on your website where you put all the questions and answers. Really great journalist is going to say, hey, this is an interesting survey, but not really what I want to write about right now. They go they look at the questions, and maybe something else resonates with them. And so I've had people who did that. They get an article about a question that wasn't the focus of the initial press release, and we do a secondary release, and then they get more pickup from that. On average, when my clients go through this and send that type of release out, they usually get between 8 and 14 articles. The least we've ever gotten of someone I've coached through this is 4. And they were in the biometrics industry, and they said they're not surprised it was just that few because there's not a lot of people that cover that very strongly. And they were very pleased to get 4 great articles. And when you're the author of a survey, it really elevates you. You stand out as an expert in the industry, and it really can be transformative for someone who's not very well known. And again, that always works. I've never had that fail. And other types of approaches that are very strategic, and among that 3% of press releases that succeed, are focusing on you at your business and what you do that's different than everybody else. I find that startups do very successful with press releases, and it's often because they have an elevator pitch and they have clearly defined their niche of what they do that is distinct from everybody else in the industry. And that goes a long ways. Having that unique selling proposition, it makes it easy for journalists to say, yeah, my audience would probably be interested in this because there's no one else doing this according to the startup. And other things is even incorporating publicly available data that's out there. I mentioned the one about the transportation industry failure rate. Look at data that's out there. And if you have a release, is there opportunities to incorporate data points that would make it stronger argument that you're making in your press release? There's also research your industry for blind spots. I had a client come to me who was a local carpet company in New Jersey. And they said they had a budget for a 1-year campaign of a press release every month. And I turned them away. I said, I don't think I can help you. You don't have a unique selling proposition. There's really nothing distinct about what you offer. I don't think it's going to go very well. And they reacted and said, hey, we've got the budget and we're going to spend it. So if we don't spend it with you, we'll spend it with someone else. So I was like, well, I'll take your money. So we did 4 releases with them and nothing happened. And I wasn't surprised, but I did feel guilty. So I did a brainstorming session with them. And the question that really changed everything was like, who's your biggest enemy? And I just expected it was like Carl across the street with the rug emporium or something. But they were like the big box home improvement stores. And they talked about how bad they are for the carpet industry and how, for example, they just call people who have a home improvement license in the state and say, hey, we have 2,400 square feet of carpet that needs to be installed on Wednesday. Would you be interested? And they don't know whether they're calling a carpet installer or not. They just know there's a home improvement license there. And so they may have called a roofer that doesn't have work that week. And all of a sudden he's going to go on YouTube and try to figure out how to do carpet. And so it's not unusual, they said, to go into houses who got carpet 7-8 years ago and the carpet looks terrible and they want new carpet. And the problem is it was never installed properly. It was never properly stretched. The seams were never done properly. And the padding that they used just wasn't right for the type of carpet. And so we did a press release about that. And it was sort of like a David versus Goliath approach. And they got picked up in it seems like every floor trade publication wrote an article about it. It was over a dozen places picked it up, that release.
Yeah, so I'm curious about that actually. So I did a quote, I think it was on the banking crisis like a year and a half ago. And it was in the Journal or something. And I got I'm part of Entrepreneurs Organization. So they sent something out about it. And, it was fine, but I was quoted in a Journal article, but it didn't do anything for my business. So is it better? I mean, I guess it depends on what you're doing, but it strikes me that the Trade Journal is better than USA Today, right? In some ways.
It is. I mean, it definitely shows a lot of recognition within your industry. And in their case, when we finished the campaign, we had gotten about 30 clips from them. Fortunately, we got in their local newspaper, and New Jersey Magazine, which is a consumer magazine, does a little more upscale, and they thought it was perfect for their audience. But the bulk of their clips, 27, 28 of them were floor trade publications, and their customers don't read those. But what they did is they put it all together, printed it out, and put it in a binder they called the brag book. And every time they went and gave a quote, they would say, hey, we may not come in the cheapest, but we've been doing this for X amount of years. It's very rare that we've ever had to go back in and you move all of your furniture so that we have to restretch the carpet. And all of a sudden the customer's going, wow, that's a thing. And then you open the book and just say, hey, here we are featured in Floor Trade Weekly. Here we are in Floor Coverings Today. Here we are in the local paper, New Jersey Magazine. They don't read it. It really is just thumbing through a little bit of it, less than a minute. And by adding that to the conversation, it increased their conversion rate 17%. So almost 1 out of every 5 sale that they were previously losing, they were now converting. And it really goes to show that when the media writes about you, it is like third-party corroboration. It's almost like an implied endorsement. And it does create such a signal of trust with people that they are willing to spend a little bit more to work with someone who is really renowned and known for being a reputable business. And that's the real value of some of this stuff, because like I said, the trade publications, their customers aren't reading that. And so what's the use of that? And the use of it is it sends a strong signal of you being a recognized expert and authority in that world. And it does send a huge signal to customers. And it's really great for you to use that. So whenever my clients get success, I like take that link and share it on social media, share it with your leads, and also share it with your customers. It reduces churn. There's always people who are like, I'm not sure if we're using the best business. Maybe we should shop around this year. And if they see that, that's a signal that, hey, there's no need to shop around this year. You're with the right company.
That's interesting. Yeah. So it's sort of like social proof or more than social proof. It's like third party authority kind of proof, even if it doesn't directly. I mean, I'm sure you have plenty of stories about someone gets their product in the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times, and then they get a bunch of orders. But in addition to that, you can use it as this other kind of proof. Yeah. I was just saying, because I literally got one this morning from EO, a major publication doing a story about whether business owners are ramping up hiring, holding steady, or scaling back. And my main company works in government contracting. And as I think most people know, the government's still spending quite a bit of money. So I would say probably the majority of companies in my area are hiring. And there are other categories where they're cutting, say, retail or something like that. It'd be interesting, you could probably, to your point, I could probably go do like some survey of government contractors and come out with a story about how this sector is scaling up. And obviously there are these reporters who are very interested in it, right? And doing stories about that.
Absolutely. That works very well.
And then you put that out there and it's like, hey, now you're kind of like an industry expert and a go-to person, So yeah, it's interesting. I hadn't thought about it from that perspective before. So let's talk a little bit about eReleases as a business. So you've been doing this for, 25 years, something like that. So is it a good business to be in? running a newswire?
Well, I think in retrospect, I'd be a lot more profitable if I'd started a PR firm, able to get much more dollars rather than just a platform. But that being said, it does extremely well. I help a lot of people. It's financially lucrative to me. I'm also an EO member of the Baltimore chapter. And so it's been good to me. I don't regret it. I feel like I've helped a lot of small businesses. But strategically, in hindsight, there are probably more profitable avenues involving PR. But I do like what I do. I provide a lot of the education to my clients and try to get them to do better releases and more strategic releases.
And so any stats you can give us on like how big it is, like employees, revenue, anything like that?
I think right now we have about, say, around 9 full-time employees. We have some developers that are freelance and some writers that are freelance and also some support staff that are freelance. Revenue is, a little over 5 million. Profit is a few $100,000. So it's good for a small business. It's very healthy, I feel. And I think that as we grow, we get more powerful for the newswires because, we are getting an amazing, really affordable rate with them. And that being said, we also get talked to by the other wires. There's Business Wire. And that third one that I mentioned that doesn't have much presence with journalists is always trying to reach out to me and offer me a really great deal. But I feel like PR Newswire is a really good fit for us and that it is a really great value for people. Early in the pandemic, if you go to the website, eReleases.com, and click on case studies, there was a very short-lived effort to help restaurants that were closed during the pandemic. They modeled it after the War Bond Initiative, so they called it the Dining Bond Initiative. And it was very short-lived, and they wanted to do a release, so we did one at no cost for them. It would have been $349. We have a new customer special. And so we sent that out, and it got picked up in over 100 places. It's probably closer to 150 places because we just quit counting and including little newspapers because so many daily newspapers picked it up. But a lot of the large publications picked it up, like the Wall Street Journal and ESPN and Food Trades and all these places. Basically, it was like you could nominate your favorite local restaurant, and if the volunteers got in touch with them, you could make a donation that went directly to them. And it'd be backed by what they call the dining bond, which is like a gift certificate type thing. And if you had a favorite place that you would go to on your anniversary and you were worried about them, you could give $50 and it really helped. I think it did so well because it was positive news at a time where there was so much uncertainty. We had been sent home for 2 weeks to flatten the curve. And also it was actionable. The average person sitting at home felt like there wasn't much they could do, but here they could help out their local pizza restaurant or favorite restaurant that was meaningful to them. And it generated, I heard, over $10 million in revenue. And really the only marketing that was done was you just hit send on the wire. So if you have a story that really resonates, it could go really far on the wire because it's just available to so many people.
So on the business itself, right? So I guess you have to pass through a certain amount of revenue to PR, right? So like out of your revenue, you're having to pass some of that back down for this subscription deal with them, right? The access to their wire.
Right. So yeah, the Newswire gets probably $1 million or so, as a result of our relationship. And we just really try to be a good partner because we do recognize that it is such strong value for our customer base.
So have you ever thought about expanding it beyond just like a wire service to like some other way? Like, so you got customers coming in who want to get a story out, right? Essentially. Are there people doing this, like syndicating through other mechanisms beyond just like a wire?
When I always tell people there's only 2 real wires in the US of press releases, they're always like, but what about this company and that company? And they often have wire in their name. And I point out that their business model is to syndicate the release. They give the impression you're reaching journalists, but you're not. There's one place that you can pay and it will syndicate your release to a couple hundred websites. And some I've seen, Globe Newswire, which is that third party, that third wire that never really got traction with journalists that pivoted to mostly publicly traded companies. They are going all in with syndication and they're claiming that some releases get 700 syndication links. And if you look at these sites, they're not great. But it does give a busy CEO or executive or someone who's not sophisticated the idea that you did really well. But there's no articles there. There's no earned media. There's no traffic generally from any of those links or pages. And there is a very healthy market out there for syndication, but I've always felt like it's a distraction. The other thing that's happened in the marketplace is paid placement. For a few $100, you can get on Forbes, and it's not in the Forbes magazine. It's not in print. At one point when I checked, when you went to Forbes and did a search, it wouldn't even show up there. It was almost like a blog type of placement, but they don't call it a blog. And as a result, I just tell people, it's expensive. I generally see it advertised for $1,500 and up as much as $6,000 for that Forbes article. And it's the type of thing that people take screenshots of it, they send it out. And I guess it does help the people who see it to give them the impression that they're on Forbes. But I belong to a lot of marketing groups and everybody there just rolls their eyes when they see someone gets picked up in Forbes because they know it's paid placement. And again, it's not a space that interests me. I did start doing podcasts during the pandemic. I was really looking for a way to socialize and make myself available. And I really like the education component of reaching out to other audiences. And I have thought about perhaps offering podcast scheduling and availability to customers because I just see the value of it from reaching other audiences and stuff like that. And I'm always shocked at the audiences that really respond. I basically will do podcasts with all different types of audiences. I've done them with lawyers, and one was with makers on Etsy. And that one, I felt like there's nobody that will ever use us from that. But I can go in there, give them some advice. And one of the things I often do is tell people that when it comes to local media, it's the easiest media to get, and it should always be you that gets it. And it sounds daunting, but you just need to build a Rolodex, and it'll probably be less than 10 people. Find out in your local paper who writes about your industry. If you're lucky enough to have a business magazine or newspaper who covers your industry, just do your homework surrounding that. Other types of magazines or publications that would be a good fit. If it's a consumer product, is there a city magazine like we have? Baltimore or Washington, D.C. has Washingtonian. Are there publications like that would be a fit? And once you've got your Rolodex, and you can also consider TV and radio, are there segments that you've seen the programs do, like the news or something that spotlights a local business? Call and ask who the producer or booker was. of that segment and get their email address and just call and ask for email addresses. These are not celebrities. They're members of your community, and they may ask why you want it. You just say, hey, I'm a business in the community, and I occasionally have ideas that would be great stories and articles for this journalist. So I'd just like to get their email address. And they're like, oh, okay. So, they'll give it to you or patch you through directly to that journalist. And sometimes the journalist will say, well, just tell me now. And you're just like, well, I don't do well over the phone. I'm a shy English major. I prefer writing. So I'd love to get your email address and be able to pitch you. And that being said, I mentioned about what a nightmare people's email inboxes are. So I do feel like emailing them and follow-up phone call just to direct them to your pitch is not a bad idea. You don't want to be a nuisance. So I tell people to try to only send these things as they have good newsworthy ideas, but at least try to do it quarterly. And generally when people do this, you may not get anything for the first year, but as you get in front of them more and more, you'll find that they'll be working on a story and they're looking to plug in a local business and they will think of you because you pitched them. And I've had clients that did this, and after 2 or 3 years, they say, I barely even pitch anymore, and I get 2 or 3 articles a year just from the journalist reaching out to me. And the secret there is when a journalist reaches out to you, make sure you're accessible. Make sure it doesn't go to your spam. Make sure that you drop everything and you're available to them to talk to them, provide them with amazing quotes. And if they're asking whether you fit this parameter, try to creatively fit that parameter that they're looking for. In the Baltimore Sun, there's a company that I see in the paper 2 or 3 times a year. And I met them at an EO event, I think last September. And I asked them, I said, do you advertise in the Baltimore Sun? Because I'm always seeing you in there. And they go, I've never spent $1 with the Baltimore Sun other than as a subscriber. And they said, but when they respond, I will drop everything. And if it's like about HR or workplace culture, I then bring in my HR person and we sit on the phone and we're immediately available to them. We tell them we can give them a few options for quotes, and we just are very easy to work with. And the same thing can happen with anyone. And it's really great visibility in your local market to sort of get that attention.
So if a company has an idea, they want to do some releases and stuff, they reach out to you. How do you work with them? You charge them like a subscription fee over the year, or do you do it like on an individual basis?
It's per press release. We do offer writing services, but I tell people that if you look at a press release, they're very simply written. I do tell people to focus on strategic releases. And to that aim, I usually send them to that free masterclass that I have. And it's at eReleases.com/plan, PLAN. And it's a less than an hour-long video with some corresponding material. And it focuses on the types of releases that represent that 3% of releases that do get earned media and do get picked up. I find that if people look at what their competitors are doing, they're out there doing the releases that aren't among the 3%. So they're not getting pickup very often. And when it comes to AI is terrible at giving you ideas for press releases. AI is trained on all the releases out there. So it's looking at the 97% of releases that don't get earned media. And so they're not very good at it. So focus on the ideas of looking at the masterclass and build a PR campaign of 6 to 8 releases. Try to make as many of them as strategic as possible, looking at the examples that I have. And if you do that, every release isn't going to generate earned media, but you might find 2 or 3 that do. And again, if it's meaningful pickup, it can be very transformative just in the customers and leads it brings. But even overall, sharing those links with your clients and your leads will increase your conversion rate, lower your churn rate. And also, it just adds you as an expert in credibility. We work with lots of people that go on Shark Tank, and producers recommend us. And one of the reasons that they do so well with the media is they know exactly what they're doing that's different than everybody else. I kind of mentioned that before with the unique selling proposition, but they also recognize that getting that earned media early makes everything easier afterwards. So they usually do a big publicity blitz over a few months. Initially, they get earned media, they incorporate it onto their website, the logos. These are really good places like Inc. magazine and other places. They're not paid placement. They're places that people recognize. and then they cut on paid traffic, and they know that their conversion rate is going to be improved because of these signals of these articles that have already been published and that they've been recognized out there, both on Shark Tank and these other places.
I love it. Well, Mickie, that's great. I think it was really informative. It was a good lesson on like how to get some earned media, which is the term, if people don't know it, for getting press that you don't pay for, you earn it. And it's an interesting business. I hadn't really come across it before. So it's fascinating. Appreciate you coming on the pod.
It was great talking with you.
All right. You have a good one.
You've been listening to the Small Business Mentor podcast, brought to you by Alan Pence. For more insights on how to navigate your business through its black holes, visit @apence on X. Don't forget to search for Small Business Mentor in your podcast app to subscribe. Thank you for joining us, and here's to your next leap in business growth.